On today's show, a very special fun Friday as the San Diego Padres make their biggest edition of the offseason, seemingly in the dead of night out of nowhere in the form of Nick Pivetta. What I think of him as a pitcher, what he brings to this Padres squad, not just on the field, but what it says about the organization going forward, as well as the signing of Mr. Kyle Hart from the KBO. Lots to talk about. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Friday, February 14th. Happy Valentine's Day to all of you out there who observe or are aware of it, whatever. As always, I'm your host with sometimes occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You can follow me on Twitter /X and Blue Sky at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO. Go check me out on there, as well as checking out Just Baseball, which is a website that I work for, and I write especially about the Padres and also do a newsletter to keep you up to date on all things happening in the league, especially signings like the one with Nick Pivetta, ladies and gentlemen. What a sign that was. Amazing stuff. Today's episode, guys, we're going to be talking about all of that and what it means for the team, because I certainly have a lot of thoughts. But first, let me just tell you, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. So here's the thing. Initial reaction, I was just, look, it's been no secret that this is a team that's been going through a lot. And one of the things I talked about on yesterday's episode, which I actually recorded prior to the signing, by the way, sorry folks, I was a little busy, I couldn't do an immediate episode. I figured it's Fun Friday anyway, you know what I mean? That Friday feeling is good. Let's save it for today. But one of the things I talked about was the back end of the rotation, and I also talked about the question about, is the Padres' lack of spending because they know what they're doing, or is it truly just because we have a lot of ownership strife going on? And I think we might have gotten a little tiny bit of an answer as the Padres on Wednesday, not dead of night, but basically out of nowhere, it feels like about like 9:30 Eastern time, mine time, the Padres signed Nick Pivetta to a deal. And let me tell you, folks, what a moment this is for the Padres. They signed him to a 4-year, $55 million contract, and it's got some weird details to it, right? And that also contributes to what we have to talk about today with what this says about the rest of the team, right? In 2025, he'll be making a base salary of $4 million, and he's got opt-outs after years 2 and 3. In years 2 and 3, 2026 and 27, he makes $19 million, then $14 million, then $18 million. So it's a weird contract, a very, 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 very weird contract. And it kind of falls in line with what happened last month, or at least what feels like last month, maybe it was just a couple weeks ago, with the Michael King deal when they came into some weird unconventional agreement. And basically, AJ Preller is on some finesse mode. He is trying to take whatever he has and build a team. They actually did an athletic story about this very thing by Dennis Lynn. I actually recommend go checking it out. Just a nice quick write-up on Preller. And here's the thing. Some people might say, Javi, you've criticized Preller before. You've hated Preller before. I haven't hated AJ Preller before. In fact, I actually think that if he ever was let go, I would still remember him kind of fondly, because I'd be like, this guy brought a lot of excitement to San Diego. And while, yes, a big part of that is ownership, especially in the form of Peter Seidler, rest in peace, willing to spend in the first place, it still does take a GM, as evidenced by the Baltimore Orioles situation, to have the guts to really go out there and say, we're going for it, we're going to spend money, and we're going to make trades, and we're never backing down, frankly. That's kind of what I would describe Preller as, just a guy that never backs down. And it's an amazing moment, I think, for the Padres fan base, because we've been waiting all offseason for some big moves. The vibes have been very, very bad, and it's so bad, in fact, that your biggest moves were Connor Joe and Jason Hayward, right? Like, those are your biggest moves at one point. And now those moves look a lot better because you substantiated it, right? They've been supplemented, I should say, I think is the right word, by a signing like this, which is obviously big, okay? Like, genuinely big. And look, I know some people have been saying, the Padres, this is showing evidence that they need to enter a rebuild. I've never been one of those people, even if I was really worried about the Padres. The reason is because I don't think they can enter a rebuild. It's very awkward to have guys like Machado and Cronenworth and especially Tatis, and you know what I mean? And then you have a young superstar in Jackson Merrill. That's usually not the sign you're going to tank. Now, if they have a bad season, yes, maybe they're going to start saying, okay, we have to do it. But you don't do that following an LDS appearance, despite what Harold Reynolds on MLB Network would tell you, right? Just an absolutely preposterous exercise where every offseason, like a lot of the mainstream pundits you'll see on TV talk about how they have to trade Tatis. They've been saying this every year, basically since 2021 or 2020. Right? 2021, let's say. They're always like, maybe they should consider trading him. Oh, I heard the Yankees, ESPN radio, just BSing, right? And just saying, oh, I heard the Yankees are interested in trading, they're going to trade for Tatis. All sorts of weirdness. Preller doesn't give up. Sometimes he makes mistakes, right? I've been very, very critical of that. I think that the contract for Xander Bogaerts was getting a little bit overzealous there, right? I really do. But all in all, I think this is an exciting move for the state of the Padres. And we got to talk about Pivetta, and we'll talk more about the state of the Padres for sure on today's episode. But man, really exciting stuff. I actually talked about Nick Pivetta early on this offseason when I did my offseason wish list. And one of the things I talked about Yasmani Grandal, I talked about Roki Sasaki, and I said if you were to get a back-end guy, Nick Pivetta was my target. Do I want to throw that out on socials after this? Maybe I should. I don't know why I haven't already. I'm actually going to put that down in my notes because I probably should brag just a little bit that I called it. Post on social media your Pivetta take. But no, in all seriousness, guys, the reason that I like Nick Pivetta so much is because I didn't think that he was going to be a pitcher that cost all that much money. And I thought that he's the type of guy, and given all the money that the Padres have spent, it's totally okay if they start making moves around the edges. And he's the type of player that I thought could do that. Now, frankly, I didn't know what was going to go on because a lot of pitchers getting paid a lot of money this offseason. There's teams always, hungry for starting pitching. It's 20 million AAV, all that stuff. But to get a guy like him on as low an AAV as they did, right? Considering all of the drama they've had, I think that's the key about this move. They did not do what the D-backs did, which was make a genuinely shocking move for one of the top pitchers, if not the top pitcher on the market in Corbin Burns for $200 million, right? It wasn't like that. But when you take into account the Padres situation, you take into account the ownership, you take into account that they had to trade away Juan Soto, you take into account that they didn't have much of a farm system, you take into account that Michael King and Dylan Cease have been in trade rumors for a long time, you take into account that Robert Suarez has been in trade rumors for a long time, you take into the fact that Jurickson Profar didn't sign with the team and did say, and I'm not taking shots at Profar, I would never, believe me, I would never. We love you, baby. I hope you do great in Atlanta. Maybe not against us, but in general, he says, they've got some ownership issues. Like, this has been a real thing. So when you take that into account, I know this sounds crazy, but I think that with everything going on, this might be the most surprised I've been about a Padres deal in a very, very long time. Like maybe Xander Bogaerts level in terms of surprise. Because the Xander Bogaerts deal, speaking of the dead of night, that happened at like 11 o'clock at night. And I was like, wait, what? Like, that's crazy. They don't even need a shortstop. That one was shocking too. I think Pivetta is surprising given all the bad turmoil over the past few weeks. And just this vibe of this is a team that, had the TV deal fall apart, Peter's passing, the ownership turmoil, all that stuff. And you're like, oh, wow. They made a deal for a guy that immediately raises the floor of this rotation. And that's why I talked about in this offseason. I did not think he was going to be a guy that could win you a World Series or anything like that. But I think he carries a teensy bit of upside. And most importantly, he's just going to be a major league arm. We don't have to head into the season being like, God, I hope Randy Vasquez breaks out. You know what I mean? And that means a lot. And it means a lot for a team's morale, too. I imagine the clubhouse must be like, this is great. Like, we still have AJ's still doing it. He's still wheeling and dealing. So now we got to talk about Pivetta himself, guys, and talk a little bit about more what this says about the Padres franchise, interspread between fun stuff indeed. But before we get into that, guys, I just need to take a quick second to take a break, right? Take a break. I'm going to have my water break in a second. But first and foremost, I have to talk to you guys about FanDuel, our sponsor for today's podcast, guys. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. And there's no better place to get in on that than FanDuel, America's number uno sportsbook, guys. With FanDuel, you can place bets live throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. It's awesome, guys. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your bets into a same game parlay. Love it very much right now, guys. FanDuel, one more time. Let me just tell you. I said at the top of the episode, do you remember? Well, don't worry. I'm here to remind you, because that's what we do on ad reads. We remind you stuff. You can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. This NBA, NHL, WNBA, college, whatever's going on season, guys. But of course, make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And just like that, everybody, we are back here on the Locked On Padres podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Remember, every day, you should also go follow me on Twitter/X and Blue Sky, JAVIIPENO. Especially hit me up on any of those places and send me your questions. Also, YouTube comments too, because Monday we will be doing the mailbag, and I imagine after these moves, people will have some questions. But let's talk about Pivetta in a little bit more detail, ladies and gentlemen. With Nick Pivetta, like I said, I talked about him early in the offseason. And one of the reasons I talked about him early in the offseason is consistency. And that's kind of what you want when you're a team like the Padres with all the money that they've thrown out and maybe financial limitations. You want consistency. This is a guy who has thrown at least 142 innings every single year since 2021. And over the stretch of from last year and the year before, his 27.1 strikeout rate. That is his strikeout rate, 27.1%. Over the last 2 seasons, that ranks 15th best among all qualified starters. That's pretty dang good for a team that just needed, frankly, just a guy who would fill innings. And instead, you might have a guy with a little bit of upside. And that's really, really exciting, like genuinely. And also, last 2 seasons, when it comes to a minimum of at pitching, like combined totality of these last 2 innings that have thrown at least 200 innings, Nick Pivetta ranks 5th in his strikeout to walk ratio. The guy has pretty decent control. The only people that rank ahead of him, by the way, Tariq Skubal, Tyler Glasnow, Chris Sale, Joe Ryan. That's it. That's it. That is an exciting list. I know that Joe Ryan is like the one out of all of those that's like the clown emoji from the, you know, that like the soldiers standing in a line, and then there's this one guy with a clown. I know that, but frankly, Joe Ryan stuff is also really good. And if you're getting a pitcher like a Joe Ryan, and he's your 4th starter, again, this raises the floor for the Padres like you would not believe. I think this guy could be really, really, really good. I just do. His stuff is also pretty electric. One of my favorite starts that he had, and I actually posted about this on my socials accounts, was his start last year against the Braves, in which he went 7 innings, gave up no runs, struck out 9, walked 2, and only gave up 1 hit. And 5 of those strikeouts came on just 3 pitches. He's got the talent, man. Like, the talent is absolutely there, despite what the ERA might tell you, right? Over the past 4 seasons, which we've been talking about, he hasn't had an ERA under 4. In 2021, it was 4.5. The year after that, 4.5. Last year, 4.04. This past year, 4.14. Those 2021 and 2022 years, those were like classic innings eater. You know what I mean? Like, you have value, don't get me wrong, but we've seen a little bit of change. His field independent pitching, his FIP, and his expected ERA are pretty lower than before. And it's gotten better every year, right? Except for 2022. That was the only year where it was like, no, he just wasn't pitching as good. But every year, 3 of these 4 last years, he has had a lower expected ERA than his current ERA. Last year's expected ERA was 3.51. Year before that, 3.98. Year before that, 4.65. Not great. Year before that, 3.81. And what I think is happening here also is that the Padres see something with his stuff. Last year, I think one of the reasons his expected stats are lower is because he just had apparently the worst cutter in all of baseball. Now, he only threw it 5% of the time, but people were slugging, batters slugged 879 off this thing. Which is like, what? Like, why are you throwing this thing? You know what I mean? I think that that's why some of the models like him to potentially get a little bit better, right? He does give up a lot of hard contact, but in general, the stuff is pretty good. His fastball, batting average and expected batting average, 239 and 231 respectively last year, and his sweeper, which is his number 1 pitch. This is the thing with the most movement. It has good extension, and it's got a really great whiff rate at 35%, and batters have an expected batting average of just 189 against it. So don't get me wrong, they can hit him hard, but the talent's there. He actually reminds me, like, very vaguely of like a Nate Eovaldi. And what I mean by that is Nate Eovaldi was a pitcher for years. For years. And I'm not saying in terms of the stuff. I'm saying in terms of the vibe and the production. And those are two separate things, by the way. Right? I really do believe that. He reminds me of Eovaldi. Because Nate Eovaldi for a long time was this super talented pitcher that threw hard, and everyone's like, what's going on? Early on in his career, 3.6 ERA, 4.3, 3.39, then 4.3, 4.2, 4.76, then 3.81, then 5.9. And then he finally figured it out and started delivering some really quality seasons, and he's been a pretty good pitcher all these past years. He reminds me very much of Eovaldi, a guy who's going to get you a decent amount of strikeouts. In fact, more strikeouts than Eovaldi. Maybe not as much low hard hit contact, which we'll get into in a second. But I just feel like the talent's there and he can generate swings and misses. And when you can generate swings and misses the level of which he can, the upside is so high. That doesn't mean that you ignore when you give up earned runs, right? You want to bring up an example of good strikeouts but high ERA. Sometimes that's Dylan Cease, right? Dylan Cease can't have those blow up games. Frankly, if they turn Pivetta into a Dylan Cease, though, that's an absolute win, and the Padres are making the damn playoffs if that happens. But with this guy, I comp it to Eovaldi because Eovaldi took a while, always showed the talent. The ERA was bloated, but you saw that he had good stuff, right? He threw really hard, and that's the case of Nick Pivetta. Now, the drawback, of course, in which I've been alluding to, is he gives up a lot of hard contact. In fact, a crap ton of hard contact, like genuinely one of the worst in baseball. His 1.5 home runs allowed per 9 innings is the 10th worst among starters these past 2 years, right? So that's not good. That's not good. But I do think that with all the things that I've suggested before, especially, in my opinion, the most exciting thing, the strikeout to walk ratio, which is like the most kind of stat that I don't bring up a lot on this show, and that's my fault. I don't talk about that enough, which is just, it sounds simple, and it's true, and it works, and it usually amounts to being a very good pitcher. There aren't many guys that have a great strikeout to walk ratio that are really bad starters. There's just barely any like that, right? Whoever gets the most strikeouts with the least amount of walks, they're good. Rocket science, right? I already talked about the players that were above him in that area these past 2 seasons, but other players that were below him, Zach Wheeler, Pablo Lopez, Logan Gilbert, Bailey Ober, that's a little bit of a weird one, but he's new. Yusei Kikuchi, Freddie Peralta, Sonny Gray, Blake Snell, Garrett Cole, Michael King, George Kirby, Cole Reagans. Now, Blake Snell, of course, walks every batter, and then he has 40% strikeout rate every year. But all those guys that are named are really good pitchers. And for him to be slotted in at the 4, he's the 4th pitcher now. It just raises the upside of this team 10 friggin' fold. And low AAV. They found a way to make this contract work. They found a way to, with their salary constraints, get a guy who has a little bit of prove it potential, right? Like he can go out and be awesome. And the Padres have been actually pretty good at signing guys and giving them that might be a little bit undervalued in the league when they currently get them. And then they turn into stars that end up getting more elsewhere or just end up becoming good values. And what I mean by that is the trade for Joe Musgrove. Were people in on him? People were excited. They were like, that curveball has been getting a lot better lately. Well, Nick Pivetta over these past few seasons has become a strikeout beast, right? And we've seen that it's worked out for the Padres, not just with Musgrove when they targeted him, but when they targeted Seth Lugo, when they targeted Michael Wacha. Preller's been pretty good at actually working within his constraints, sometimes constraints that he himself made and created for himself, right? And finding some decent under-the-radar guys. I'm not saying they have the best ability of that. They're not Cleveland. They're not the Dodgers. They're not the Braves, teams like that. But they do a pretty good job, given that the narrative of this team is always spend. They have elite, star potential, and then nothing else. I actually think that is a slightly overrated narrative. Sometimes it's not. I get it, right? Like sometimes it's like, holy God. 2021, great example, right? Second half just falling apart. They didn't have enough depth, right? But in general, I don't think they get credit for being able to put together a pretty decent roster, all things considered, even if it's a little bit ugly, and at least they're trying. You know what I mean? And the biggest thing about this signing, and I've said it already a bunch of times on this pod, but you no longer are relying heavily on Darvish staying healthy. And don't get me wrong, even before the Nick Pivetta signing, I was like, okay, these options, the options that they have, it could be worse out there, right? Like there's actually like, it could be much, much worse. Don't get me wrong. But I just really like what they did here. And if Darvish were to get hurt, That's those three. You're cooking. You're cooking with that. And now, whether it be Matt Waldron, whether it be Randy Vasquez, whether it be Brian Homer, whether it be Stephen Kolek, who was announced recently by AJ Cassavell and Mike Shell, I think came out and said like Kolek is going to be one of the guys competing for a rotation spot. Whoever it ends up being, the upside when you head into a season and your third starter is an injured mess and you don't have necessarily proven talent behind him. Randy Vasquez was rough at points last year. It's really great, guys. That's why I was so excited about this deal. It shows me that the Padres are absolutely not going away into the dead of night. I was actually almost resigned. I was writing an episode that I'm still going to do on Tuesday, by the way, or Wednesday, one of those 2 days, about is the Padres championship window kind of closed? I go back and forth on this. Bottom line is they're trying to be competitive, and I really, really do appreciate that, and it's a really, really good sign from the team. And while, yes, Nick Pivetta has problems, the strike to walkout ratio stuff that I mentioned to you already, the fact that we've got Petco and Ruben Niebla. So all those home runs, Petco is a pitcher-friendly park. You might get like a 3.7 ERA from this guy with a 25% strikeout rate. That's totally possible. Like, he might be a really good pitcher. Maybe 3.7 is a little bit low. I don't want to say that he's just going to be Dylan Cease, but you get my point. I think that there's a lot of upside here, and usually they do well. I know some people might say, well, Sean Manaea was one of those guys. Yeah, that's one deadly thing of this, is that Sean Manaea, before he went to the Padres, had like his career most strikeouts and his career most innings, came in there at like a 4.9 ERA. I get that. Hasn't always worked out. But with Ruben Niebla in town now, I just trust that they're going to be able to get more out of this guy, and I think that one of the reasons other teams you might be thinking weren't after this guy is one of the negatives, which is that the Padres do surrender a compensatory pick for this guy. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the negative aspect of the Nick Pivetta signing. But even with that negative aspect, I'm going to talk about why it ain't even all that bad. But just a second, guys, because first, we need a word from some of our sponsors. And just like that, everybody, we are back thriving and vibing on this fun Friday into the last segment of this podcast, talking about Nick Pivetta. Before the break, we mentioned, they have to give up a draft pick for this deal, as written in the, what's it called? Give me a minute. The Athletic, right? They do have to give up a pick, a second rounder, in fact, and $500,000 international bonus pool, because Pivetta did decline a qualifying offer from the Red Sox. Complicated how we ever got to this point with that stuff, but that is the situation. But for me, my thing is I trust AJ Preller. This is a guy who is an incredible scout. Even if you don't like his signings, even if you don't like his roster construction, the guy's a good scout. He always seems to find guys. I feel like he goes into this and he's like, yeah, whatever. You know what I mean? Okay, I'll trade my farm guys. Like, I'm not going to give up a Merrill, a DeVries, right, an Ethan Salas for nothing and just to get like a bullpen arm. But some of these other guys, I think he's like, yeah, whatever, I'll find someone. I think that that's how he might be approaching these things. He's like, whatever, I'll find someone else. We gave up what's his face with Kenzie Gore. I found Gasser and Snelling and Dylan Lesko. You know what I mean? Like, I'll find guys, but it is still a negative to point out. And in my opinion, I think that draft pick thing, that's probably the reason that a lot of teams weren't bullish on signing Pivetta early on in the offseason, because they didn't want to give up that draft pick. But to me, that's more of a reflection of baseball being full of a lot of teams where they know they don't have money to spend. So trading draft picks is like a death sentence for them, right? Like, they have to build that way because baseball's messed up, and there are other teams that are more of an issue than the Dodgers spending, right? It's the other teams that don't try and have ownership that don't care. I mean, I'm pretty sure Cleveland's owner is like one of the 4 richest owners in all sports, or something like that. It's like crazy how much money that guy's worth. So again, that's where we're at. But that is one negative. But I do think overall that we're looking at some juice, guys. I really do. And I'm wondering, is this a move? There's a lot of questions with this. Is this a move that's just kind of like ownership and all of them trying to push back against a lot of the flack that they've been getting in Padres circles and some media circles, the way that they've been getting a lot of bad coverage? They're a mess right now. They're not going to do anything. They've been ranked as one of the teams that did the least this offseason, one of the worst off seasons. I wrote an article power ranking the most miserable moments of this offseason, right? But alas, that is where we're at. Maybe this was them saying, all right, we can't make it look that obvious, right? So this doesn't mean that officially ownership is going to be fine. That's not what that means. it could just be a damage control sort of moment where they're like, okay, fine, you can do this Nick Pivetta deal. We'll figure it out. You can backload the money later or whatever. And maybe that's what Preller did. I kind of like my fan fiction is that Preller was like, hey, so can I sign this Nick Pivetta guy for like $4 million a year? They're like, yeah, of course. Okay, $4 million's fine. And he's like, okay, backload the contract. You know what I mean? Like I know that's ridiculous, but I just like the idea of Preller just being this guy that's dealing with a lot of constraints and he's finding his way around them, right? Really, really exciting stuff. And I can't wait. The other deal that they did make, speaking of moves, right? All of a sudden, the Padres vibes are really good. They also announced they have signed left-handed pitcher Kyle Hart to a 1-year contract with a club option. He made 20 starts in the KBO last year, posted a 2.69 ERA in 157 innings. Now, I know some people might hear KBO and they're like, well, that's not where all the superstars are. But still, the Padres have had some luck from the KBO, not just Ha-Seong Kim. Frankly, a lot of teams are having luck from the KBO. I think that we should start recognizing that there are international prospects and the baseball sport is growing in a lot of ways across the world. But in the KBO, we also got Nick Martinez from there, right? Nick Martinez actually ended up being a pretty good pitcher. I'm not expecting a 2.5 ERA, but as written about in the AJ Preller piece, quote, I think it's time to win the NL West outright, said Kyle Hart. Right? Love that. The guy's already super competitive and he's jazzed to be here. Who partly attributed his KBO success to a new sweeper and a lower arm slot. In quotes, I mean, it's been almost 20 years now since we've won the division, and the Padres have had a lot of great teams in the last 5 years. I mean, really, really good teams. And I'm just happy to be here, to be able to help. I feel like that's another reason that I chose this organization, is I think we're ready to win. We're going to keep winning, and I'm a better pitcher when I'm on a team that's winning. Love the attitude of this guy already love you, Kyle. Like, my heart is with you, Mr. Kyle Hart. I appreciate that. The strikeouts are really good, but it seems like the sweeper, could that be a new thing? Did he find something? This happens a lot in the sport where guys find stuff internationally, whether it be Japan, whether it be the KBO league. They find things and fine tune them and then come back to Major League Baseball or debut in Major League Baseball. I mean, Robert Suarez, like, this was a guy that we found internationally too. And it was not going all that amazing for Robert Suarez before then. Like, now he's had some struggles, right? But for the most part, this is a guy who has really, really succeeded. Did Robert Suarez play in the KBO? I forget, actually. Let me check that really quickly. Okay, and PB. Okay, there we go. My bad. My apologies for the mistake, guys. I just wanted to make sure. But overall, the Padres have had success here, and I think that's exciting. He is another one of those guys that will be competing for that last rotation spot. Did the Padres get an absolute steal? I mean, for $1 million, I'd be pretty impressed if all of a sudden the Padres were able to get a really great fifth starter. But bottom line is there's options. They gave themselves more leg room. They do not need Yu Darvish to have a miracle season in which he pitches 140 innings at 3.8 ERA ball. That's not what they need. Instead, they just, Darvish being healthy is still paramount to their success. Don't get me wrong. But the whole season isn't riding around it. The rotation isn't a house of cards anymore. And there's still the possibility that trades happen. But one thing that this move signals, and according to all reports from MLB trade rumors, Athletic, etc., Kevin Acee himself, does not seem like now Dylan Cease is going to be traded, basically officially. I never thought he was going to be traded either. I thought that he was one of those guys that they're just dangling, and I think this happens all the time in sports, and it's important to remember that. I think they were just like, look, if the Orioles bite and give me Kobe Mayo and like another big prospect and a pitcher and a bat, then yes, I will trade him. But otherwise, I'm not just trading him just to trade him, which is a really good sign because there are other teams whose ownership doesn't spend anything, which in my opinion makes GMs have to trade their guys to just get something for them before they end up leaving in free agency. I think the Oakland A's are a good example of that, right? Like they just are pretty tough in certain negotiations. I love that. That Preller can say, I'm down to keep him. I'm keeping him, you know what I mean? Either go big or go home. We're not just giving up this guy for peanuts. It doesn't make sense to do that. It's dumb, right? So they're still going in on it this year. So yeah, guys, this is really exciting stuff. I know that Nick Pivetta, there could be a world in which this goes wrong, right? Or at least a world where it's not as exciting as we once did. I understand that. But given the strikeout rate of 27.1%, over these last 2 years, being the 15th best among all starters, given the fact that his strikeout to walk ratio over these past 2 seasons is the 5th best in baseball, and everyone else on that list is a great pitcher that we always acknowledge, with the exception of maybe Bailey Ober, only because he's a little bit more new into everything. We don't know for sure, but he's still very good too. I understand the home run per 9, 1.5 home runs allowed per 9 innings is the I think is the 10th worst, if I'm not mistaken. It was the 10th worst among all starters these past 10 years. He gives up a lot of home runs. But you know what? We've got Ruben Niebla. Maybe you change things up. I know that usually pitchers past the age of 30, you don't always tinker too much with them, but even still, I think they can figure out some things. Change up the usage. Make sure you figure out whatever the heck went wrong with that cutter last year, and you take advantage of the fastball and sweeper in a little bit better of a way. Ruben Niebla's turned a lot of great pitchers around, a lot of talented pitchers, and got the best out of them these past few years. That's why Padres fans love him so much, and frankly, that's why he was going to be, at one point, from what I've been told, probably the manager of the Cleveland Guardians, and for whatever reason, that fell apart. So, super lucky to have him. Go check out my episode, by the way, that I did like 3 years ago when they signed Ruben Niebla, when they brought him on board. I talked with Cleveland Guardians host, I believe, about that, and just how exciting that move was for the team. So all of that considered, plus the Petco confines, I think this is a win, guys. I really do. I don't want to like have this come back to bite me, right? The bottom line, throws innings, gets strikeouts, and I think there's at least a teensy bit of upside. And what more can you ask for out of your fourth starter? That's what winning teams do. That's what exciting teams do. And that's what teams do when they're really well run, or at least they're beginning to be well run, which is what it seems like the Padres are with Preller, with Niebla, with the front office in general, with the scouting department, with the new pitching lab and all that. The vibes are back. At least a little bit, to the point where we can go into the season not expecting the worst of the worst of the worst. Not to mention Jackson Merrill might be an extension candidate. That's what's coming out now too. So everybody, those are my thoughts. I hope you enjoyed them here on today's episode of the Locked On Padres podcast. Go check me out again on Twitter /X and Blue Sky at Javipeno, Javiipeno. Send me your questions either there or in the YouTube comments, because Monday we are doing a mailbag talking about whatever happens. I might even talk about Alex Bregman a little bit. We're going to have my boy Ben Kaspick back on the show next week. It's been a while. Talk with him, host of Locked On Giants, about the offseason state of the NL West, especially following this move. Really good vibes, guys. Be excited. Tempered excitement, but be excited that it looks like Preller's still doing Preller things and they're finding a way to be competitive and improve the team. Really good stuff, guys. But until that next time, stay safe and, of course, stay faithful. My Fire Faithful homies, take care.